Hello, and welcome back to Noir Lullaby. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that sing like a dark lullaby, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, I work closing shifts at a supermarket that stays open until midnight. It is not a large store, but it is not small either. There are 16 main aisles, a bakery near the entrance, a pharmacy that closes earlier in the evening, and a stockroom that takes up most of the back wall. During the day, the place is loud and busy. Shopping carts rattle across the floor, children cry near the candy section, and announcements play over the speakers every few minutes. At night, it becomes a completely different place. After 11, the crowds disappear. The music sounds quieter, even though the volume never changes. The refrigerator motors become more noticeable, and every little sound seems to travel from one side of the building to the other. My job is simple. At around 11:45 p.m., I make the final announcement. I tell everyone that the store will be closing in 15 minutes and ask them to bring their purchases to the front. At 11:50, I walk through every aisle and check for customers. After the last person leaves, I lock the doors, set the alarm, and go home. Most nights, there is nobody left in the store. Most nights. The first time I saw the man was on a Tuesday. It had been a quiet evening. We had a few customers buying snacks, medicine, or last-minute groceries, but most of them had left before the final announcement. At 11:50, I began my usual walk through the store. I checked the produce section first, then the bakery, the frozen food aisles, and the shelves near the pharmacy. Everything seemed normal. When I reached aisle 12, the pet food section, I saw someone standing at the far end. He was facing the shelves with his back toward me. He wore a dark jacket and a gray hat pulled low over his head. In one hand, he held a blue plastic shopping basket. At first, I was only annoyed. Customers often ignored the closing announcement. Some people seemed to believe that if they entered the store before midnight, they could shop for as long as they wanted. "Excuse me," I called. "We're closing in 10 minutes. The man did not move. I walked farther into the aisle. "Sir, the registers are about to close." He still did not react. I began wondering whether he was wearing headphones. I could not see his ears because of the hat, but it seemed possible. I continued toward him. When I was about 10 feet away, he suddenly turned. I did not get a good look at his face. His hat hid most of it in shadow. He did not say anything. He simply began walking toward the front of the store. His movements were quick, but quiet. His shoes did not squeak on the floor, and the basket did not swing or bump against his leg. I followed him because I wanted to make sure he paid for whatever he was carrying. By the time I reached the registers, he was gone. The cashier at the front looked at me when I came around the corner. "Did someone just come through here?" I asked. She shook her head. I looked toward the entrance. The automatic doors were already locked from the inside, so customers could leave, but nobody could enter. I had not heard them open. I checked the small lobby between the doors. It was empty. I assumed the man had used one of the emergency exits. Customers were not supposed to do that, but it happened occasionally. Teenagers sometimes pushed the doors open for fun, and shoplifters used them when they thought they were being watched. I checked the alarm panel. No emergency door had been opened. That bothered me, but not enough to report it. I told myself I had simply missed him leaving through the main entrance. The next night, I saw him again. This time, he was in the frozen food section. Same dark jacket, same gray hat, same blue basket. He stood in front of the freezer doors without moving. I called out to him. Once again, he did not respond. When I walked closer, he turned and left the aisle. I followed immediately. He disappeared before I reached the front. This time, I checked every emergency exit. All of them were still locked. None of the alarms had been triggered. I told my manager about it. She was sitting in her office, counting money from one of the registers. She barely looked up while I explained what had happened. Probably someone hiding before closing, she said. Hiding where? She shrugged. Kids do it sometimes. They think it's funny. He wasn't a kid. You sure? Yes, she sighed and placed a bundle of bills into a drawer. Do your final walk a little earlier. If you see him again, tell me. Her answer did not make me feel better, but I did what she suggested. On the third night, I began checking the aisles at 11:45. I found him in aisle 7, where we kept cleaning supplies. He was standing beside the bleach and laundry detergent. It was 11:55. I did not approach him this time. I stayed at the end of the aisle and watched. He stood completely still. The basket hung from his right hand. His left arm rested at his side. I watched him for nearly 2 minutes, waiting for him to pick something up or turn his head. He did nothing. Then, without warning, he turned and walked out of sight. I followed him. The next aisle was empty. I checked the aisle after that. Nothing. I walked quickly toward the front, but he was not there. There was nowhere else he could have gone. That was the night I asked to see the security footage. My manager rolled her eyes when I brought it up. You're really worried about this guy? I just want to know how he keeps leaving. She stared at me for a moment, then unlocked the security office. The room was small and warm. Several monitors covered one wall, each showing a different part of the store. The cameras were old, and the image quality was not very good, but they were clear enough to recognize people. We pulled up the recording from the first night. I remembered seeing the man at around 11:50, but my manager decided to check earlier footage too. At 9:47 p.m., the aisle was empty. The video changed to the next frame. The man was standing there. There was no footage of him walking into the aisle. He did not enter from either side. He did not come out from behind a shelf. 1 second, the aisle was empty. The next, he was standing in the middle of it with a basket in his hand. My manager replayed the section several times. Each time, the result was the same. No way, I whispered. She did not answer. We checked the entrance cameras. We watched every person who entered after 6 that evening. Nobody matched the man's description. My manager leaned back in her chair. Camera glitch, she said. Her voice had changed. She no longer sounded annoyed. She sounded nervous. After that, I started watching for him every night. The pattern was always the same. He appeared between 9:45 and 9:50 p.m. He was always alone. He always wore the same clothes. He always carried the same blue basket. He would stand in a different aisle each night, facing the shelves without moving. If I got too close, he walked away and disappeared. I never saw him choose an item. I never saw him pay. I never saw him leave. At first, I tried to keep my distance, but curiosity eventually became stronger than fear. One night, I hid near the dairy section. The glass doors of the milk coolers reflected part of aisle 4, where we kept canned food. The man was standing there. From where I was hiding, I could finally see his face clearly. He looked like he was in his mid-40s. His skin was pale, almost gray beneath the store lights. There was no expression on his face. His mouth was relaxed, and his eyes seemed tired. He did not look angry or frightened. He looked empty. That was also the first time I paid attention to what was inside his basket. There were 6 items: a bag of dry dog food, a box of frozen peas, a bottle of bleach, a can of beef stew, a pack of light bulbs, and a small yellow box. The yellow box made me uncomfortable, although I could not immediately understand why. Then I recognized the label. It was a brand of dishwasher powder called Shine Light. My grandmother had used it when I was younger. I remembered the yellow box sitting beneath her kitchen sink. She complained for months when the company stopped making it, because she believed no other dishwasher powder cleaned as well. Shine Light had been discontinued in 2009. The box in the man's basket looked completely new. The colors were bright. The cardboard was clean. There was no dust, damage, or fading. I told my manager about the box the next day. She did not laugh at me this time. We went back into the security room and searched the archived recordings. The store kept old footage on a separate system. Most of it was never watched, but the files went back many years. We opened a recording from 2008. It took us a long time to find the correct time, but at 9:47 p.m., the man appeared. Same face, same jacket, same hat, same basket, same 6 items. He did not look younger. We checked another night from 2009. He was there. Then, 2010. Every year we checked, we found him. For 16 years, the same man had been appearing inside the supermarket. He had not aged. His clothes had not changed. The basket had not changed. The 6 items had not changed. My manager sat silently for a long time after we finished. "What do we do?" I asked. She rubbed her face with both hands. "I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" "I don't know yet. I suggested calling the police, but she said we had nothing useful to tell them. The man had never stolen anything. He had never threatened anyone. As far as the cameras showed, he only stood in the aisles. I asked whether we should contact the company's security department. She said she would speak to someone. The following week, she quit. She did not give notice. She did not call anyone. She simply stopped coming to work. I sent her several messages, but she never replied. The store brought in a new manager. I explained everything to him during his first week. He listened with an expression that made it clear he thought I was wasting his time. "So, this person comes in every night?" he asked. "Yes. Does he steal?" "No. Does he bother customers?" "No. Then it's not my problem." I tried to show him the old footage, but he refused to watch it. After that, I stopped approaching the man. For several weeks, I ignored him. I still saw him during my closing walk, but I pretended I did not. If he stood at the end of an aisle, I turned around and checked somewhere else. He never came closer to me. He never spoke. He never changed his routine. Eventually, the fear became part of the job. I would make the closing announcement, walk the aisles, see the man, lock the doors, and go home. That was how things remained until last night. I started my final walk at 11:50 as usual. I checked every aisle. The man was not there. I went through the store again. Still nothing. For the first time in months, I felt relieved. Maybe he had finally stopped coming. Maybe whatever had tied him to the supermarket had ended. I locked the doors, set the alarm, and walked to my car. I remember feeling lighter as I drove home. This morning, I came to work early. I wanted to check the footage from the night before. I told myself it was only curiosity, but part of me needed proof that the man had truly disappeared. I entered the security room and pulled up the recording from 9:47 p.m. The camera showed aisle 12. For 1 second, it was empty. Then the man appeared. Same clothes, same basket, same expression. He stood there for almost a minute. Then, he did something he had never done before. He began walking toward the back of the store. He was not heading toward the exit. He was walking toward the stockroom. The cameras inside the stockroom have been broken for years. The store keeps promising to repair them, but it never happens. The man disappeared through the stockroom doors. At 10:02 p.m., he returned. He was still carrying the blue basket. He walked back into aisle 12. Then, he bent down and placed the basket in the middle of the floor. For the first time, he left it behind. He turned and walked toward the front doors. The doors were supposed to be locked from the outside at that hour, but they opened when he pushed them. The alarm did not sound. He stepped into the parking lot. The exterior cameras lost sight of him in the bright glare from the lights. He did not return. The basket remained in aisle 12. I continued watching the footage. For the rest of the night, nobody touched it. Customers walked through the aisle, but none of them looked down. Employees passed nearby without reacting. At 11:58 p.m., the recording showed me doing my final walk. I entered aisle 12. The basket was sitting directly in my path. I walked past it. I did not step around it. I did not look at it. I moved through the exact place where it was sitting, as though it did not exist. But on the camera, the basket was clearly there. I remember the aisle being empty. I remember checking the shelves. I remember seeing nothing unusual. The recording showed something different. After watching the video several times, I switched to the live feed. The basket was still there. It sat in the middle of aisle 12, beneath the bright store lights. Same blue plastic, same 6 items. I left the security room and went downstairs. The aisle appeared empty at first. Then, as I walked closer, the basket seemed to come into focus. I do not know how else to explain it. It was as though my eyes had been refusing to notice it. One moment, there was only the floor. The next, the basket was sitting in front of me. I crouched beside it. All 6 items were inside. The dog food, the frozen peas, the bleach, the beef stew, the light bulbs, the yellow box of Shine Light. I picked up the dishwasher powder. The cardboard felt dry and new. There was a small white sticker on the back. It said, discontinued, 2009. I checked the other items. Every single one had the same kind of sticker. Discontinued, 2009. I searched the product names on my phone. The dog food brand still existed, but its formula had changed in 2009. The frozen peas came from a company that had gone out of business. The bleach bottle had a label design that had not been printed in more than a decade. The beef stew can had an old pull-tab top that the company stopped using in 2008. The light bulbs were incandescent bulbs that had been banned for sale in our state years ago. Everything in the basket was old, dead stock, products that no longer belonged in the world. I put the yellow box back into the basket. Then I counted the items again. There were only 5. I stared into the basket. The dog food was gone. I thought I had miscounted, so I checked again. Frozen peas, bleach, beef stew, light bulbs, shine light. 5 items. The bag of dog food had vanished. I looked around the aisle. I checked beneath the shelves. I searched behind nearby displays. There was nothing. I returned to the security room and played the footage again. When the man left the basket, all 6 items were there. The bag of dog food was easy to see because it was larger than everything else. At 10:15 p.m., the image glitched for a single frame. When the picture returned, the dog food was gone. No one had entered the aisle. Nobody had touched the basket. The bag simply disappeared. I have been sitting in the security room for more than an hour now. I keep watching the live feed. The basket has not moved. 5 items remain. I searched for more information about the dog food. At first, I thought the formula change explained the sticker. It did not. The brand had not simply changed its recipe in 2009. That particular type of dog food had been recalled. There had been a manufacturing error. Several animals became sick, and the company ordered every bag to be destroyed. According to the reports, none of the recalled bags were supposed to remain. Not in stores, not in warehouses, not in private homes. Every bag had supposedly been collected and destroyed in 2009. There should not have been one left anywhere, but the man had carried one in his basket every night for 16 years. Now it is gone. I do not know what that means. I do not know why he left the basket. I do not know where he went after entering the stockroom. The stockroom cameras are still broken, and I am not going back there alone. I keep thinking about the stickers. All 6 products were discontinued in 2009. The same year the dishwasher powder disappeared. The same year the peas company closed. The same year the dog food was recalled. Maybe the basket is not filled with groceries. Maybe it is carrying things that have been removed from the world. Things that were forgotten, destroyed, or replaced. I do not know what happens when every item disappears. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe the man comes back. Maybe something else leaves the stockroom. The worst part is that I cannot remember whether the basket was really empty when I walked past it last night. The camera showed 6 items, but I saw nothing. What else has been in the store that I could not see? How many times have I walked past something that only existed on the cameras? How many years did employees work here without noticing that man? My old manager noticed. Then she quit. I tried calling her again a few minutes ago. Her phone number is no longer in service. I searched her name online and found nothing recent. No social media, no new job, no address. It is as though she disappeared after leaving the store. I do not want to stay here, but I am afraid to leave the cameras. I feel like I need to see what happens next. I know that sounds stupid. Every part of me is telling me to run, but another part believes that watching the basket is the only thing keeping it from changing. I looked away for less than a minute earlier. When I looked back, the frozen peas were gone. The live feed still showed 4 items: bleach, beef stew, light bulbs, shine light. I checked the recording. At 12:26 p.m., the screen glitched. 1 frame disappeared. Then the box of frozen peas was gone. Nobody entered the aisle. The basket did not move. I searched the frozen pea company again. The company did not simply close in 2009. Its factory burned down. The fire happened late at night. 6 employees died inside. The company never reopened. I do not know whether that matters, but I cannot stop thinking about it. The dog food was destroyed. The peas came from a factory where people died. What about the remaining items? I searched the bleach company. The bottle in the basket came from a limited production run in 2009. The batch was removed from stores after several bottles leaked during transport. One truck carrying the shipment crashed on a highway. The driver died. I have not searched the beef stew or light bulbs yet. I am afraid to. The live feed is open in front of me. 4 items are still inside the basket. At least, they were when I started writing this. I just checked again. There are 3. The bleach is gone. The timestamp says it disappeared 2 minutes ago. The image glitched for 1 frame, exactly like before. I can see the beef stew, the light bulbs, and the yellow box. The basket looks larger now that it is almost empty. Or maybe the inside looks darker. I cannot tell. Something else has changed, too. The stockroom door is visible at the far end of the camera. It was closed a few minutes ago. Now it is open. Only slightly. There is darkness behind it. The stockroom lights should be on. They are controlled by motion sensors, and someone has to walk through the doorway for them to switch on. The lights are still off. I can hear something over the security room speakers. At first, I thought it was interference. Now, I think it is a shopping basket scraping across the floor. The sound is coming from the stockroom. It stops every few seconds. Then it begins again. Closer each time. I just checked the live feed. The beef stew is gone. 2 items remain. The light bulbs in the yellow box. I know I should leave. I know I should call the police, even if they do not believe me. But the front doors will not open. I tried the emergency exit beside the security room. The handle moved, but the door would not open. The alarm did not sound. My phone still has a signal, but every call ends the moment it connects. The store intercom just turned on by itself. There was no announcement, only breathing. Slow, wet breathing. Then someone whispered my name. I do not know the man. I have never told him my name. The live feed has started flickering. Every time the picture returns, the stockroom door is open a little wider. The basket still has 2 items. I am staring at it while I write this. I am afraid to blink. I searched the light bulbs. The factory that made them closed in 2009 after a worker was killed inside one of the machines. I searched Shine Light. The dishwasher powder was discontinued after a chemical contamination. The official reports said no customers were harmed, but I found an old local newspaper article. A woman became seriously ill after using it. She died several weeks later. The company paid her family and recalled the remaining boxes. The woman's name was Margaret Hale. I recognized the name. My grandmother's name was Margaret Hale. Nobody ever told me how she died. My family said she became sick suddenly. The yellow box is the last item left in the basket now. The light bulbs disappeared while I was reading the article. 1 frame of static. Then they were gone. The man is standing inside aisle 12 again. He was not there a moment ago. He is not wearing the gray hat anymore. His face is turned toward the camera. I can see him clearly. He is smiling. The yellow box is still in the basket. He is pointing at it. Then he points toward the security camera. Toward me. I think I understand now. The basket was never his. He was only carrying it. waiting for someone who could recognize the final item, waiting for someone connected to it. The camera just glitched again. The basket is empty. The man is gone. But there is someone standing behind my chair. I can see the reflection in the dark monitor beside me. She is holding a yellow box. She looks exactly like my grandmother did before she died. And she is smiling. Story 2. A room is a space created when several flat surfaces are brought together until their edges meet. Walls rise, a floor spreads beneath them, and a ceiling closes over the top. What remains inside becomes a hollow area where people live, sleep, eat, argue, hide, and slowly build their lives. Rooms are the main concern of interior design and architecture. They are not only empty spaces waiting to be filled with furniture. Their shapes affect us, even when we do not realize it. Vertical lines suggest strength, independence, and firmness. Horizontal lines make people think of comfort, rest, and safety. Curved spaces suggest movement, creativity, freedom, and sometimes femininity. Diagonal lines create a feeling of action and energy. They make the eye move quickly, as though the space itself is leaning, falling, or rushing towards something. Architects are taught to be careful when mixing horizontal and vertical lines with diagonal ones. A badly designed room can disturb a person. It can create discomfort without giving the visitor any clear reason for feeling it. Irregular shapes can have the same effect. A circle with a piece missing from it, or a pyramid without its top, can create tension. The mind notices the damage. Even the word missing suggests that something should be there, but is not. Most people prefer complete shapes. A full circle feels calm. A balanced square feels stable. A finished triangle feels strong. When a shape is broken, bent, or incomplete, the mind begins trying to repair it. If the irregularity is mild, it can make a design interesting. If it is too strong, it can make the room feel unsafe. Rectangular rooms are the most common kind. They are simple, box-shaped, and easy to use. Some people criticize them for being boring. They associate them with stiffness and confinement. Other people like them because a box can feel private, protected, and intimate. The correct proportional formula for dividing a room is 1 to 1.618. The golden ratio. The relationship appears in nature, art, mathematics, and buildings. People often find it beautiful without knowing why. The ends of my thumbnails keep splitting where the nail meets the skin. The skin blisters, breaks, and pulls away. I have developed a nervous habit of rubbing it back over the nail, pressing the skin into place, as though I can force the two parts to remain connected. I do it without thinking. Sometimes I wake up in the night and find myself doing it. I was once inside a room that disturbed me. It was in the attic of my grandparents' house. They had renovated the space into a guest bedroom, or at least something that was meant to resemble one. The walls were painted a faded green. The strange thing was that the walls were also the ceiling. They leaned inward from both sides and met only 3 feet above my head. If you stood at one end and looked along the length of the room, you saw a perfect triangle. At the far end was a small rectangular window pressed into the wooden panels like an eye trapped inside a face. Symmetry is supposed to represent strength, stability, and ceremony. I look down at my hands now and bring the tips of my thumbs and index fingers together. They form a triangle, a clean, balanced shape. I was sleeping in that attic room when my grandmother began playing her violin in the middle of the night. I was very young. I do not remember exactly how old I was, but I remember waking suddenly to a noise that seemed to tear through the whole house. The sound was wild, harsh, and without melody. The violin screamed from somewhere below me. My grandmother dragged the bow across the strings as though she were trying to injure the instrument. The notes rose and fell in painful waves, sometimes sharp enough to sound like metal scraping across glass. I became so frightened that I wet the bed. At the time, I thought a demon was singing in the basement. The strange part is that my grandparents' house did not have a basement. I knew that even then. I had lived there long enough to understand the building. There was a ground floor, an upper floor, and the attic room. No stairs led underground. No cellar door existed beneath the carpets or behind the kitchen. Still, when I heard those inhuman sounds, I believed they were coming from below the house. A person might say that a frightened child waking suddenly in the dark accepts the first explanation their young mind can create. That is reasonable. But there is another part of me that wonders whether there really was a room beneath us. Perhaps it was not a room we could enter through a normal doorway. Perhaps it was an extension of the house that human beings could not see. A hidden area folded into a direction our simple bodies could not follow. Maybe something older than the house was already there before my grandparents built above it. Maybe their home existed inside something larger. Maybe the awful triangular attic room was only one small part of a structure that had been growing for centuries. Sometimes I think my grandmother's violin was not simply making music. Maybe it was acting as a tool of communication. Perhaps the thing beneath us used the screaming strings to express its anger at our presence. Or perhaps it was pleased that we had finally noticed it. Do you know how many spaces inside your home are large enough to contain a human body? Not rooms, spaces. The space beneath a staircase, the gap behind a wall, the hollow inside a ceiling, the dark area under floorboards, the narrow space behind a bathtub, the unused cavity beside a chimney, a gap hidden behind cabinets. A domed ceiling is meant to remind people of the universe. It suggests greatness, power, and monumentality. A dome is not natural in an ordinary house. Corners are the points where the visible space of a room ends. A complex hollow space cannot exist in 3 dimensions without corners. When 2 flat surfaces meet at an angle, a corner is created. Corners give buildings shape, but they also create mystery. There are 2 basic kinds of corners. The first kind faces outward from the room. It creates empty space around it. This is the kind of corner beside which you might place a bookshelf, a chair, or a lamp. The second kind faces inward. It extends into the room instead of away from it. These inward-facing corners interest me much more. Every house has them. Even a tiny studio apartment contains inward corners near its entrance, bathroom door, or kitchen area. They appear beside fireplaces, support beams, baseboards, window frames, wall panels, and built-in cabinets. When a house begins to form an extension of itself, you will usually notice it first behind an inward-facing corner. It will be there before the hallway appears. It will look at you before you can see its whole body. 2 legs, 3 rib cages, 6 eyes, and every room a mouth. That is my house. Yours may be similar. Every complex, hollow space reflects the creature living inside it. If your house does not resemble you as a person, then it must resemble something else. I am an architect. Every night, I have the same nightmare. The first time it happened, I walked out of my bedroom and entered my living room. I immediately knew something was wrong. Nothing obvious had changed. The furniture was where it belonged. The walls were the same color. The ceiling light was off. But the room felt stretched. The distance between the walls seemed greater than it should have been. My breathing sounded too loud, and the air carried the smell of dust and old paint. I turned toward the hallway. I could not see anything inside it. The darkness was too deep. Yet I knew something was standing there with its mouth open, watching me. I also knew I was not supposed to enter the hallway yet. The knowledge came without explanation. It was simply present in my mind, as certain as knowing that fire burns. I turned away and approached the windows. The light outside was painfully bright. It filled the glass with a white glow so strong that I could not see the street, the sky, or the neighboring houses. My pupils would not adjust. The muscles in my eyes refused to narrow them. No matter how hard I stared, the world beyond the windows remained blank. I turned around. The rug was gone. In its place, drawn across the scratched wooden floor, was a huge blueprint. At first, I did not recognize the building shown on it. The design was enormous. It looked like a government complex, an ancient palace, or the private estate of someone with unlimited money and no concern for sanity. Rooms spread across the floor in every direction. Hallways twisted between them. Large chambers opened into smaller spaces, which divided again into narrow passages and strange empty shapes. Then my eyes found one familiar section near the edge of the drawing. My heart sank. It was my house. Every room was there. My bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, living room, guest room, and hallway had been drawn with perfect accuracy. But my house was attached to something much larger. New hallways grew from familiar walls. Hidden doors opened into unknown rooms. Corridors extended from closets, bathrooms, and spaces where no doorway existed in the real house. My home looked like a tiny growth attached to an enormous body. It was like a tumor connected to the nervous system of an elephant. I crouched and examined the blueprint. There was no doubt that it showed my house. But the house was only one entrance into a structure too large to understand. I noticed a new corridor drawn beside the guest bedroom. Slowly, I looked toward the door to my left. That door always led into the guest room. I stood and walked toward it. My hands shook as I wrapped my fingers around the handle. I pushed gently. The door opened without a sound. There was no guest bedroom beyond it. A long hallway stretched into darkness. Its walls were unfinished drywall. The floor was bare wood. No pictures, doors, or lights broke the endless surface. The hallway seemed to continue far beyond the space available inside my house. Then I heard the voices. They came from the original hallway behind me, the one where I already knew the creature was waiting. The sound was a long, slow choir made from different voices. Some were familiar, others were completely unknown. They blended into a soft, chirping cry. It sounded as though many people were trying to speak through the same mouth. A woman's firm voice appeared for a moment, then changed into the bright, bubbling laugh of a baby. That became the weak whistle of an old man. A child whispered. Someone coughed. Someone else began to sing a note and stopped halfway through. The voices moved up and down in pitch, constantly adjusting. Between each change was a small, wet sound, as if the throat making them had to rearrange itself. If a living radio existed, made from flesh, bone, and hundreds of vocal cords, this is what it would sound like. I heard attempts at words. Nothing complete. Only pieces of speech pushed through a mouth that did not fully understand language. Then I heard hooves. Many of them. They struck the wooden floor softly. Thump, thump, thump the sound came slowly, carefully. A numb feeling spread through me when I understood what it was doing. The creature was moving quietly on purpose. It did not think I could hear it. It was trying to sneak up on me. My throat tightened. I could not think. I could not move. I released the door handle and stepped backward into the new hallway. My eyes remained fixed on the inward-facing corner that divided the living room from the hall. That corner was the only thing preventing me from seeing the creature. It was also the only thing preventing the creature from seeing me. The voices stopped when I moved. For 1 second, I heard a young girl's quiet laugh slip through the remaining whispers. Then, silence swallowed it. The hooves stopped. I waited. The air became completely still. That was when I understood that the creature was listening. It was waiting for me to make another sound. I stood frozen, afraid even to breathe. Then fingers appeared around the edge of the wall. They were impossibly long, thin, and wrinkled, like the fingers of an old chimpanzee. They slowly wrapped around the corner. The knuckles shifted beneath the skin. Some separated into smaller joints. Others merged together. The hand changed shape while I watched. My body felt as though it had caught fire. Every instinct told me to run, scream, hide, or fall to the floor. More of the creature began to emerge. Several pale points appeared above the fingers. At first, I thought they were bones pushing through its skin. Then I understood that they were antlers. A huge rack of them slowly came into view from behind the wall. Something inside my mind broke. I screamed and turned away. I ran down the unfamiliar hallway as fast as I could. A primitive terror filled my body. It was older than thought, older than language. It moved through my bones and forced my legs forward. The hallway blurred around me. I turned corners, crossed empty rooms, passed through doorways, and rushed beneath low ceilings. Dust and old paint filled my nose. Some rooms were narrow and tall. Others were wide, but only a few feet high. I kept running. With every turn, despair grew stronger because I already understood the truth. The rooms and hallways did not end. I ran for what felt like an hour. My legs burned. My jaw hurt from clenching my teeth. Sweat poured down my face and soaked my clothes. Eventually, I entered a small room that looked like an office. A cheap wooden desk stood against one wall. A broken chair lay on its side. The ceiling was made of stained white tiles. I closed the thin door behind me and fell against it. Dry sobs escaped my throat. I knew the creature was coming. I also knew it knew exactly where I was. But the creature was not the only thing frightening me. The building itself filled me with a deeper horror. Inside the dream, I understood that this place had always existed. It was not built by human hands. It changed and expanded on its own, like a massive animal evolving without end. I could sense endless arms folding into its body. Rib cages opened from its chest like flowers, then curled inward and became hallways. Eyes moved across its flesh in waves, staring blindly into the darkness around it. Its limbs twisted and shook as they developed more joints than they could ever need. New arms grew from old arms. Bones divided, bent, and connected again. The whole shape moved like a turning pattern made from bone, muscle, and nerves. Diagonal lines can disturb a visitor. I placed my hands on the hot concrete floor. My vision exploded with color. Bruised purple and sick orange filled my eyes. I could see tiny holes in the concrete, each one producing drops of sweat. I looked up at the ceiling tiles. They were no longer tiles. They were teeth. Countless teeth surrounded a head too large to view all at once. They clicked and shifted like coral growing across a stone monument. A lighthouse is a finger. Eyes are the windows of the soul. A million black horns rose into a red desert. Above them hung a huge blood-colored sun. It burned down on sand made of glass, heated to more than 3,000 degrees. I turned and felt microscopic pieces of glass cut into my bare feet. In the distance stood a massive temple painted in ugly shades of blue, yellow, and red. Its design belonged to no architectural style I knew. Still, the colors had meaning. The walls had meaning. Every shape expressed a rule or idea beyond human understanding. For one brief moment, I understood that I was not allowed to be there. The knowledge was absolute. Nausea rose through me. Then, I woke up with a terrible headache and vomited beside my bed. I did not bother calling work that morning. I spent most of the day in the bathroom, unable to decide whether I wanted to keep vomiting or drink enough alcohol to lose consciousness. The feeling left by the dream was worse than fear. My mind felt damaged. Something had touched it and left a mark that I could not explain. I knew the mark was evil, though I had no logical reason for knowing. Even while the memory made me sick, I could not stop thinking about the structure. I had spent my life studying architecture. My mind was trained to examine space, proportion, support, movement, and design. Naturally, I tried to understand the building from the dream. I remembered the huge blueprint drawn on the floor. I tried to recreate it, but many details disappeared as soon as I woke. I could remember the general shape. There was a large hall on the far side of a twisting system of narrow corridors. The hallways resembled an intestinal tract, bending and folding through hundreds of small connected rooms. There was a huge stadium with rows of pillars at both ends. One single hallway stretched almost from one side of the blueprint to the other. It cut across the design at an unusual 30-degree angle. I began drawing what I remembered. At first, I used loose pages, then notebooks, then rolls of paper. The first dream was not the last. Every night since then, I have returned to the other house. Sometimes I wake in my own bedroom and find the new doorway waiting for me. Other times, I open my eyes already standing deep inside the structure. Usually, the creature is not nearby. During those nights, I explore. I count my steps. I measure rooms with my arms and hands. I study the direction of hallways. I mark corners and doorways. I memorize the height of ceilings and the order in which spaces connect. When I wake, I draw everything I can remember. I have seen the creature only a few times since that first night. I have not been caught yet. The dreams continue from one night to the next. Doors I opened remain open. Marks I scratched into walls are still there. Objects I move remain in their new positions. Because of this, I no longer believe they are dreams. They are visits. Somehow, my mind or body is being allowed to enter another place. I do not know what controls it. I only know that something much larger than I can understand is giving me access to a structure where human beings, and perhaps all creatures of ordinary three-dimensional space, were never meant to exist. It is an architectural wonder and a nightmare. It grows the way a living being grows, but much faster. It changes on a scale no human mind can truly understand. New rooms appear, hallways close, ceilings breathe, domes expand and contract. Doors lead to different places each time they open. My only comfort is mapping it. I will cover every floor and wall with drawings of this absolute structure. When I run out of paper, I will draw on my own skin. When I run out of skin, I will use the bodies of others. My purpose is now clear. I sleep as often as possible. I take every sleeping pill and medicine I can afford. Each time I close my eyes, I feel a mixture of excitement and terror, because I know that when I open them again, the doorway may be waiting beside my bed. Beyond it will be the other house, filled with endless, sickly sunlight. I am its cartographer. I am a tiny speck moving across an ocean of shifting floors, closing doors, breathing domes, and groaning hallways. I will continue drawing until I understand it, or until it understands me. It is the ultimate, complex, hollow space. Story 3. Most certified nursing assistants worry about which coworker will call out next, whether they will be forced to cover another wing, and when they might finally get enough time to eat lunch. I have different concerns. I have to make sure I get tomorrow's lottery numbers from Mr. Miller before he forgets them. My name is Olivia Luna, and I have worked at Cedar Hills Nursing Home for 8 years. I started there not long after graduating from high school. At first, I thought it would be temporary. I planned to save money, attend college, and eventually find a job that did not involve changing adult diapers or arguing with confused residents about whether it was safe to climb out of a second-floor window. 8 years later, I am still there. I grew up in a large, noisy Hispanic household. My parents moved to the United States from Mexico when I was still a baby. They worked hard, saved every dollar they could, and expected their children to understand exactly how much they had sacrificed. Throughout my childhood, I heard some version of the same sentence almost every week. We did not come all this way for you to fail math. Sometimes my mother said it while standing over my homework. Sometimes my father said it after seeing a bad test score. Once, my mother said it because I had forgotten to carry a number while adding up the price of groceries. I also had 2 older brothers, which meant peace and personal safety were never guaranteed. Between my parents' expectations and my brother's constant attempts to frighten me, my nervous system burned out early. It happened slowly, like a mouse chewing through an electrical wire, one bite at a time, until the light finally went dark. My brothers treated scaring me like a competitive sport. They locked me in closets, hid beneath my bed, jumped from behind shower curtains, and chased me through the woods behind our house wearing masks they had bought from a Halloween store. More than once, they convinced me that a serial killer was hiding somewhere nearby. They would whisper that they had seen someone standing outside my bedroom window. Then they would leave me alone in the dark and scratch softly against the glass from outside. Eventually, I started punching them. They were hit enough times that they finally understood I was no longer an easy target. Because of them, most things do not frighten me anymore. Cedar Hills still does. The nursing home always smells like a mixture of disinfectant, old coffee, and whatever strange ingredient makes nursing home mashed potatoes taste exactly the same, no matter who cooks them. The building has 3 main wings arranged around a central nurse's station. Most of the rooms are painted in soft colors that management claims are calming. The walls have framed pictures of flowers, sailboats, and country roads. None of the pictures are interesting enough to hold anyone's attention, but that is probably the point. The floors shine beneath bright ceiling lights during the day. At night, when half the lights are turned off, the same hallways seem longer. Sounds also carry strangely after midnight. A cough from one end of the building can sound like it came from directly behind you. A television playing in a resident's room can become a distant whisper once you turn a corner. Wheels squeak, pipes knock inside the walls, and doors sometimes move because of changes in air pressure. At least, that is what maintenance says. When I first began working at Cedar Hills, the unusual events were small enough to ignore. Residents often complained about seeing people in their rooms at night. That is not as unusual as it sounds in a nursing home. Many of our residents have dementia, memory problems, or medical conditions that can cause confusion and hallucinations. If you work in healthcare long enough, you learn not to treat every midnight emergency as proof that something terrible is happening. Mrs. Grayson insisted that a man in a gray suit stood beside her bed every Tuesday night. According to her, he never spoke. He simply watched her sleep. She was very specific about Tuesdays. If she woke up on a Wednesday morning, she would calmly eat breakfast and ask about the weather. If she woke up on a Tuesday night, she would scream until someone came into her room and checked behind every curtain. Mist Hargrove claimed there was a little girl living in his closet. He said she wore a yellow dress and would ask him whether her mother had arrived. We searched the closet several times. There was never anything inside except clothing, shoes, and a plastic bag filled with old birthday cards. Another resident spent nearly 3 weeks accusing the vending machine of spying on him. He would sit across from it in his wheelchair and glare at the display. Whenever anyone bought a snack, he whispered that the machine was gathering information. Most of the time, there was a reasonable explanation for the things residents reported. Usually, some incidents were more difficult to explain. For almost a month, half the residents on the East Wing complained that the mashed potatoes tasted like toothpaste. They did not say the food tasted spoiled. They did not say there was too much salt or not enough butter. They all said toothpaste. Some claimed the potatoes tasted like mint. Others said they tasted like the strong paste dentists used during cleanings. One woman refused to eat anything served on the same plate because she believed the toothpaste flavor was spreading into the other food. Maintenance checked the water pipes. The dietary staff inspected the kitchen. Every ingredient was examined, and several bags of potatoes were thrown away just in case. The administrator held an entire staff meeting to assure us that nothing was wrong with the food. She spoke for almost 20 minutes about quality control, safety standards, and the importance of not encouraging residents' false beliefs. The complaints stopped the following day. No one ever discovered why they had begun. After that, things became harder to dismiss. Room 14 had been out of service for months because a pipe burst inside one of the walls. The plumbing had been completely replaced only a few years earlier, so no one understood why the pipe failed. Management blamed a sudden buildup of pressure. Maintenance opened the wall, replaced part of the pipe, and wrapped enough duct tape around the area to make it look like the tape itself was now supporting the building. They claimed it was repaired. The room still smelled damp. Water had soaked into the drywall and damaged part of the floor. Management removed the bed and furniture, locked the door, and said they would decide later whether to renovate the room. Nobody lived there. Nobody had permission to enter. The call light still went off. Every few nights, the light for room 14 appeared on the panel at the nurse's station, flashing as if someone inside needed help. The first time it happened, I assumed a resident had entered the wrong room. I hurried down the hall, unlocked the door, and found the room empty. The second time, I thought there might be an electrical problem. The third time, I called maintenance. They tested the wiring and told me nothing was wrong. After that, the call light continued turning on every few nights. Sometimes it flashed only once. Other times it remained on until someone went down the hall and shut it off from inside the room. I eventually started ignoring it. There are only so many times a person can sprint down a hallway at 3 in the morning before becoming tired of helping an empty, musty room. Room 14 is disturbing, but it is not the main reason I am writing this. The real reason is Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller is 99 years old and flirts like a 20-year-old man who has never been rejected in his life. Whenever I help him into bed, he asks whether I come with the room. When I remind him to take his medication, he says he would rather have my phone number. Once, after I adjusted his pillow, he told me he would marry me if he were 70 years younger. I told him I would still say no. He said he respected a woman with standards. Miss Miller served in Vietnam when he was young. After returning home, he became an art teacher because he had grown tired of violence and wanted to spend the rest of his life creating things instead of destroying them. I cannot blame him for that. He taught at the same high school for more than 30 years. Even now, when his memory is failing, he often believes he is still in his classroom. He gives residents advice about shading, color, and perspective. He also criticizes the paintings hanging in the hallways and claims the artist does not understand light. He carries a small spiral notebook almost everywhere. He sketches in it whenever his hands are steady enough. He is also nearly impossible to beat at skip-bo. He acts surprised whenever he wins, even though he wins almost every game. Then he leans back in his chair with a smug little smile and asks whether I would like him to explain the rules again. I have considered hiding the cards. Mr. Miller also tells me the winning lottery numbers before they are announced. They are not good guesses. It is not a lucky streak. He gives me the exact numbers, except for the final number. He always forgets the last one. The first time it happened, I assumed he was joking. He had been asleep in his chair near the window. I entered his room to collect his lunch tray, and he suddenly opened his eyes. He looked directly at me with a frightened expression. 14, 22, 31, 37, 44, he said quickly, and something in the 60s. I stared at him. What are you talking about? The numbers, he replied. What numbers? He frowned as if I were the confused one. The winning numbers. Then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. I laughed about it later and wrote the numbers on a sticky note. I placed the note in my pocket and forgot about it until the next evening. The winning lottery numbers were 14, 22, 37, 44, and 68. 5 exact matches. After that, I started carrying a pen. Now I try to speak with Mr. Miller early in the morning, before breakfast and before the nurses begin their rounds. His predictions seem clearest when he has just woken up. If he is fully awake, he can sometimes narrow the final number down to a smaller range. Somewhere between 60 and 70, he might mutter, rubbing his forehead as though trying to remember a dream. I have never won the main prize because he never remembers the final number exactly. Still, matching several numbers has earned me a few $100s on different occasions. That money has helped with groceries, gas, and bills that seem to increase every month. I know it is probably wrong to use an elderly man's strange ability to make money, but I am a Cena. I am underpaid, permanently exhausted, and have been kicked by people who later accused me of stealing their shoes while they were still wearing them. I decided the universe owed me something. The strange part is that Mr. Miller forgets ordinary things constantly. Sometimes he forgets where he is. Sometimes he asks when his wife is coming to visit, even though she died nearly 15 years ago. Other times, he mistakes me for someone he knew decades earlier. Last month, he spent 20 minutes teaching me about perspective while drawing a bowl of apples on a napkin. The entire time, he called me Susan. My name is not Susan. When I finally corrected him, he looked offended. "Then why have I been calling you Susan all morning?" he asked. I did not have an answer. Mr. Miller forgets yesterday. He never seems to forget tomorrow. About a month ago, I brought him breakfast and found him sketching in one of his spiral notebooks. He was sitting beside the window with a blanket over his legs. Morning light stretched across the open page while his pencil moved quickly. "What are you working on?" I asked. "A landscape," he replied. I looked over his shoulder. "It looks like a hallway. Hallways are landscapes when you're 99. I laughed because I could not argue with that. The drawing showed a long corridor lined with closed doors. The perspective was perfect. The farther end of the hallway disappeared into darkness. I noticed that one of the doors was open, but the inside of the room had not yet been drawn. "What is in there?" I asked. Mr. Miller covered the page with his hand. "Nothing yet." He sounded serious, so I let the subject go. He spent most of that morning drawing while I passed medication, helped residents get dressed, and answered call lights. Every time I entered his room, he was working on another part of the same picture. By lunchtime, the hallway seemed darker. By the end of my shift, a shape had appeared near the open doorway. I could not tell whether it was a person or only a shadow. The following day, the page had been torn from the notebook. When I asked what happened to it, Mr. Miller did not remember drawing it. His predictions began changing last week. Before then, he had only given me lottery numbers. Sometimes he mentioned the weather or said what would be served for dinner, but those statements were vague enough to be guesses. Last week, he began predicting things that would happen to me. I arrived for my shift one morning and found him already awake. He was sitting in his chair with a blanket over his knees. His notebook rested open in his lap, but he was not drawing. He was staring at a blank page. I entered his room and opened the curtains. "Good morning, handsome," I said. "Do you have any numbers for me?" I said it in the same joking tone I always used. Mr. Miller slowly raised his head. His expression made me stop smiling. "You start at 5:45 tomorrow," he said. I looked at the schedule sheet hanging from my clipboard. "No, I start at 7. 5:45, he repeated. "Your coffee spills in the hallway." He lowered his eyes towards the notebook. "And do not go into room 14 tonight." For several seconds, I stood there without speaking. Mr. Miller picked up his pencil and began drawing as though he had not said anything unusual. I tried to laugh. That is very specific. He did not answer. I stepped closer. "What happens in room 14? His pencil moved faster. "Mr. Miller?" He pressed so hard that the tip broke. The sound made him blink. He stared down at the broken pencil as though he did not know how it had gotten into his hand. "Would you like breakfast?" I asked carefully. He smiled at me. "Yes, Susan, that would be lovely." The next morning, my phone rang at 3 o'clock. One of the day shift CNAs had called out sick, and the scheduler needed someone to begin early. She asked whether I could arrive at 5:45. I sat upright in bed, suddenly wide awake. For a moment, I considered refusing. Then I remembered my rent was due soon, and overtime was overtime. I told her I would come in. At exactly 5:45, I entered Cedar Hills carrying a cup of hot coffee. Before I could clock in, another employee pushed through the door beside the nurse's station. The door struck my elbow, and the cup slipped from my hand. Coffee spilled across the hallway. I stood there watching it, spread across the floor. The employee apologized several times, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was Mr. Miller. That evening, I was scheduled to stay late because another Cena had gone home sick. By 10 o'clock, the halls had become quiet. Most of the residents were sleeping. The night nurse was completing paperwork at the nurse's station, and one television played softly somewhere on the west wing. At 10:17, room 14's call light turned on. The small red light flashed on the panel. I stared at it. Mr. Miller's warning returned to me. Do not go into room 14 tonight. I ignored the light. After about a minute, it turned off by itself. At 11:03, it came on again. This time, it stayed on. The nurse looked up from her paperwork. Are you going to get that? Room 14 is empty, I said. She checked the panel. Then maintenance needs to look at it. They already have. The light continued flashing. I walked behind the nurse's station, found the cable connected to the room 14 indicator, and unplugged it. The light went dark. There, I said. Problem solved. The nurse gave me a tired look. That is definitely not how you are supposed to handle electrical problems. It is how maintenance handles them. She could not argue with that. For the next hour, nothing happened. I began to relax. Then, shortly after midnight, the room 14 light came on for the third time. The cable was still lying unplugged on the counter. The light should not have had power. It flashed slowly. On, off, on, off. The night nurse stared at it. How is it doing that? I don't know. Go check the room. I looked at her. You go check it. I can't leave the station. Neither can I. I suddenly have many important Cena activities. The light kept flashing. After another minute, my fear turned into annoyance. That happens sometimes when you work in healthcare. You become too tired to remain scared. Eventually, every problem becomes another task standing between you and the end of your shift. I grabbed the keys. Fine, I muttered. I'll shut it off myself. The east hallway was colder than the rest of the building. My shoes squeaked against the polished floor as I walked. Most of the residents' doors were closed. The lights above me buzzed softly. Room 14 stood near the end of the hall. As I approached, I noticed water shining beneath the door. I stopped. The pipe had been repaired weeks earlier. There should not have been any water. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell reached me first. Damp drywall, mold, and stagnant water filled the room. The odor was so strong that I covered my nose with my sleeve. Water covered most of the floor. It was not deep, perhaps only an inch, but there was enough to reflect the pale ceiling light. The walls had dark stains running down them, and part of the wallpaper had begun peeling away. The room was empty. There was no bed, no chair, and no resident waiting for assistance. The call light button was mounted beside the place where the bed had once stood. Its small red indicator was glowing. I stepped into the room. Cold water soaked through my shoes. Hello? I called, feeling stupid as soon as the word left my mouth. No one answered. I walked towards the call button. That was when I noticed the paper. A clean white sheet lay in the middle of the flooded floor. It should have been soaked. It should have been floating or falling apart. Instead, it rested perfectly flat against the water, completely dry. I stood over it. A charcoal drawing covered most of the page. My stomach tightened before I even understood what I was seeing. The drawing showed room 14. Every detail was there. The water on the floor, the damaged wall, the peeling wallpaper. Even the weak ceiling light had been captured through careful shading. A woman stood near the center of the room. She wore nursing scrubs. Her hair was tied back in the same loose ponytail I had worn that night. It was me. In the drawing, I was facing away from the open door. My body had been turned slightly, and I was looking over my shoulder at something behind me. The area behind my body was unfinished. Dark charcoal lines surrounded the empty space, but whatever was supposed to be standing there had not yet been drawn. I crouched and picked up the page. The paper was dry and warm. In the bottom corner, written in small, familiar letters, was Mr. Miller's signature. Story 4. I heard the front door open at the usual time. A second later, Lena's backpack hit the floor with a heavy thump. The refrigerator door opened, bottles moved against one another, and a glass was placed on the kitchen counter. It was a completely normal afternoon. I was sitting in the living room with my laptop open, trying to finish some work before dinner. The television was playing quietly in the background, although I was not paying attention to it. "Hi, Mom," Lena called from the kitchen. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered without looking away from the screen. I heard juice pouring into a glass. The refrigerator closed and Lena walked upstairs. Her bedroom door shut a few seconds later. I did not see her face. At the time, I had no reason to think that mattered. Lena was 13 and had reached the age where she no longer wanted to explain every detail of her day. When she was younger, she would come home and tell me everything. She would talk about her teachers, her friends, the strange food in the cafeteria, and any arguments she had witnessed during lunch. Now, she usually said school was fine, took a drink upstairs, and disappeared into her bedroom until dinner. That afternoon was no different. At 4:12, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen. It was a voice message from Lena. I frowned. She was upstairs. If she wanted something, she could have called down to me or walked into the living room. Sending a voice message from the second floor seemed strangely lazy, even for her. I picked up the phone and pressed play. For the first second, there was only a low engine sound. Then I heard children talking somewhere in the distance. One of them coughed. Lena's voice began quietly. "Mom, I'm still on the bus." The driver took a different turn. "I don't know where we are." The message ended. I stared at the phone. For a moment, I thought she was playing a joke on me. Lena sometimes sent strange recordings or videos to her friends, although she had never tried to frighten me before. I looked toward the ceiling. "Lena?" I called. Her answer came immediately. "What?" She sounded annoyed, which was normal when I interrupted her phone time. "Did you just send me a voice message?" "No." I raised the volume and played the recording again, holding the phone toward the ceiling as if the sound could travel through the floor. When it ended, the house became silent. Then Lena called down. "That's not me. I've been home for half an hour." I checked the message again. It had been received at 4:12 p.m., only 3 minutes earlier. I stood and walked upstairs. Lena was sitting on her bed with her legs crossed. She was scrolling through her phone, and her half-empty glass of juice sat on the bedside table. She looked exactly as she always did after school. Her brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and she was still wearing her school uniform. I handed her my phone. Listen, she played the message. Her expression changed almost immediately. At first, she looked amused. Then, her eyebrows tightened. By the time the recording ended, the amusement was gone. That sounds like me, she said. I know. But it isn't. Are you sure you didn't send something by accident? She unlocked her phone and opened her messages. There was nothing sent to me. She checked her call history and deleted files. No voice message. Nothing recorded at 4:12. It sounds wrong, Lena said as she listened again. Wrong how? She brought the phone closer to her ear, like a recording of a recording. I listened once more. She was right. The voice had Lena's tone, accent, and way of speaking. It even had the slight breathlessness she sometimes had when she was scared. But there was something underneath it, a faint roughness that made the voice sound distant. It was as if someone had played a recording of Lena through an old speaker and then recorded that sound again. I called the school. The woman in the office checked the bus records and told me Lena's bus had completed its route normally. According to the driver, Lena had been dropped off near our house at 3:40. That matched the time she had come home. The woman asked whether everything was all right. I told her it was only a misunderstanding. For the rest of the evening, Lena and I tried to explain the recording. Maybe someone had copied her voice. Maybe one of her friends was playing a prank. Maybe an old message had been delayed and arrived weeks or months late. The problem was that Lena had never sent me a message like that before. She had never been lost on a school bus, and her bus driver had never taken a strange route. When I finally went to bed, I told myself there was a technical explanation. Phones made mistakes. Messages were delayed. Numbers were copied. Accounts were hacked. By morning, the recording felt less frightening. The following afternoon, I waited for Lena near the living room window. At 3:45, I saw her walking along the pavement toward the house. She wore her backpack over one shoulder and stared down at her phone. She reached the front door, opened it, and stepped inside. This time, I saw her face. She looked tired, but normal. She dropped her bag, went into the kitchen, poured herself some juice, and walked upstairs. At 4:12, my phone vibrated. I had been watching the time. Even so, the sudden buzz made me jump. Another voice message had arrived from Lena's number. I did not play it immediately. Instead, I called her downstairs. "What is it?" she asked as she entered the living room. I showed her the screen. The color drained from her face. "Another one?" I nodded. She sat beside me on the couch, and I pressed play. This time, her recorded voice was less controlled. She sounded as though she was trying not to cry. "Mom, the windows are dark. We've been driving for hours. There are no street signs. Please call someone." There was no engine noise in the background, only wind. It was a low, hollow sound, like air moving through a long underground tunnel. Lena stared at my phone. "I didn't send that." "I know." She grabbed the phone and played it again. Then, she raised one finger. "Wait, what?" "There's something in the wind." She increased the volume. At first, all I heard was the hollow air. Then I noticed another sound beneath it. A whisper. It did not form any clear words. It repeated the same shape over and over. A soft syllable hidden inside the wind. It almost sounded like someone trying to remember how to speak. Lena paused the recording. "What is that? I don't know." "Delete it." I did. I deleted the first recording, too, then emptied the deleted folder. I restarted my phone and changed the password on my account. That night, Lena left her bedroom light on. Neither of us mentioned it. The following day, I decided not to let her ride the bus. I collected her from school myself. She was waiting near the main entrance with several other students. I watched her climb into the passenger seat. I watched her fasten her seatbelt. She was with me during the entire drive home. We stopped at a grocery store for milk, and she complained that one of her teachers had given the class too much homework. She talked about a girl named Sophie who had fallen asleep during history. Everything was normal. We arrived home at 3:56. Lena sat beside me in the living room. I kept both of our phones on the table where we could see them. At 4:11, she stopped talking. The digital clock changed. 4:12. My phone buzzed. Lena grabbed it before I could move. "Don't," I said. She had already pressed play. Her voice came through the speaker, broken by quiet sobs. "Mom, the bus stopped. Everyone else got off. I'm the only one left. I'm alone. Please, I don't know where I am." For several seconds, there was complete silence. Then another voice appeared in the background. It was very faint and sounded older than Lena. The person was humming a tune I did not recognize. Lena dropped the phone. It hit the carpet but continued playing until the message ended. She was shaking. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here. Why is that happening?" I pulled her into my arms. "I don't know." It was the truth, and I hated saying it. Parents are supposed to provide answers. We are supposed to explain strange noises, dark rooms, bad dreams, and frightening possibilities. But I had nothing to offer. I called our phone company. I spent nearly 40 minutes moving between automated menus and different employees. Eventually, I spoke to someone who claimed he could see detailed account information. He checked Lena's number. According to him, no voice messages had been sent from her phone at 4:12 on any of those days. I told him the recordings were on my phone and clearly showed her number. He said that was impossible. I asked him to send me the complete activity logs for both phones. He promised they would arrive by email within 24 hours. The email never came. I called again. Another employee said there was no record of my earlier request. After that, I began sleeping in Lena's room. We placed our phones in the kitchen before going upstairs. I checked that they were turned off. On some nights, I removed the batteries from devices that allowed it. I disconnected the wireless router and unplugged the house phone. None of it helped. Every afternoon at exactly 4:12, another message arrived. The time never changed. The voice was always Lena's. The situation inside the recording seemed to continue from one day to the next. In one message, she whispered that the bus doors had opened, but that she was afraid to step outside. In another, she said the road had ended. "The driver is gone," her voice said. "His seat is empty, but the bus is still moving." The backgrounds became worse. There was heavy static that sometimes grew loud enough to hurt our ears. There were footsteps on gravel, slowly circling whatever device was recording. There was water dripping into what sounded like a deep metal container. Once, we heard something scratching across glass. Another time, the recording contained quiet laughter from several children. The laughter continued even while Lena's voice begged me to find her. We stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. We covered the windows after sunset. Lena refused to ride the school bus and soon refused to attend school at all. At first, I told the school she was sick. After several days, the office began asking for medical documents. I tried to explain that she was suffering from anxiety, but I could hear the doubt in the secretary's voice. I did not care. I could not send my daughter away from me. Lena began sitting beside the front window for hours. She would pull the curtain back just enough to watch the street. Whenever a large vehicle passed, her entire body became tense. One afternoon, I asked what she was looking for. "The bus," she replied. "Your school bus?" She did not answer. "Lena, the bus doesn't come down this street unless students are being dropped off." "I know." "Then why are you watching for it?" She continued staring outside. "Because it knows where I live." I closed the curtain. Lena became angry and opened it again. Her behavior began to change. She slept less. She often woke during the night and asked whether I had heard an engine outside. Sometimes I found her standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at the front door. When I asked what she was doing, she always said she had thought someone had come home. No one else lived with us. Her father had left when she was 6, and we had not seen him in years. There were no brothers, sisters, or relatives who visited without calling first. Only Lena and me. At least, that was what I believed. I began examining old photographs. I told myself I was looking for signs that someone had been watching us. But that was not really true. I was looking at Lena's face. I compared childhood photographs with the girl sitting in my house. Her eyes looked the same. Her smile had the same slight curve. She had a small mark beneath her left ear that had been there since birth. Everything matched. Still, a thought had entered my mind, and once it was there, I could not remove it. What if the real Lena was on that bus? What if something else had walked into my house on the first afternoon? The idea was impossible. I had seen Lena come home on the following days. I had picked her up from school myself. Teachers and students spoke to her. Her phone contained years of photographs, conversations, and personal information. She knew things only Lena could know. She remembered the time she broke her wrist falling from the climbing frame when she was 7. She remembered the name of the imaginary dog she had as a child. She knew where I hid emergency money in the kitchen. She was my daughter. But the voice in the messages was also my daughter. Yesterday, another recording arrived. I waited until Lena was in the living room before playing it. I did not want to listen alone. She sat in the chair across from me, her arms wrapped around her body. My phone showed 4:12. I pressed play. For several seconds, there was only slow breathing. Then Lena's voice spoke in a whisper. "Mom, don't let me come home." The voice paused. "The one downstairs isn't me." A refrigerator hummed in the background. A cabinet door opened and closed. A glass touched the kitchen counter. I slowly turned my head toward our kitchen. The same sounds were coming from the room behind me. The refrigerator was running. One of the cabinet doors moved slightly before settling against its frame. The recording was not playing sounds from a bus, tunnel, or empty road. It was playing the sounds of our house, not sounds from earlier that day, the exact sounds around us at that moment. Lena stared at me. "I'm not the one sending those," she said. I wanted to tell her I knew. The words would not come. I was no longer sure. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away from me. Then she asked a question I had been trying not to think about. "Which one of us came home first?" I said nothing. She leaned forward. The first day. Which one came home first? Me or the one sending the messages? I heard you come home, but did you see me? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I remembered the front door opening. I remembered the backpack striking the floor. I remembered the refrigerator. I remembered a voice saying hello from the kitchen. But I did not remember seeing her face. Not until after the first message arrived. Lena had already been sitting on her bed when I entered her room. I had assumed she was the person who had come through the front door. It had never occurred to me that she might not be. I don't remember, I finally admitted. Lena's expression became strangely calm. That frightened me more than if she had screamed. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and remained there for several minutes. I could hear her opening drawers. When she returned, she sat across from me again. I did not ask what she had been doing. Neither of us slept last night. This morning, I tried calling the police. I ended the call before anyone answered. What could I tell them? My daughter was receiving messages from herself. One version of her might have been trapped on a bus that did not exist. The girl inside my home might not be human. They would think I was ill. Perhaps I was. I checked the school records again. Lena's attendance showed she had been present every day before I stopped sending her. I called one of her teachers and asked whether anything unusual had happened on the day of the first message. The teacher said no. Before ending the call, she added something. Lena seemed a little confused that afternoon. Confused about what? She asked whether the buses had already left. My hand tightened around the phone. What time was that? A few minutes after dismissal, around 3:35. Did she get on her usual bus? I assume so. You didn't see her? There was a pause. No, I didn't. I called the bus company. The driver remembered dropping Lena near our house, but he could not clearly remember watching her leave the bus. There are a lot of children, he explained. They get off quickly. Was there anyone left on the bus after the route? Of course not. How do you know? I check. Did you check that day? Another pause. I always check. That was not an answer. The entire afternoon, Lena and I remained in the living room. She sat across from me. I watched her. She watched me. Neither of us spoke. At 4:00, I placed my phone on the table between us. At 4:05, Lena asked whether I was afraid of her. I said no. It was a lie. At 4:08, I noticed she had not blinked for a long time. At 4:10, something large moved past the front window. I did not look. I heard a deep engine rumbling outside, but the sound quickly faded. At 4:11, Lena smiled. It was not a wide or unnatural smile. It was small and tired. That almost made it worse. The clock changed to 4:12. My phone buzzed. Neither of us reached for it. The screen displayed a new voice message from Lena's number. The phone remained on the table. I'm not playing it, I said. Lena did not respond. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen lit up by itself. The message opened. The speaker activated. Lena's recorded voice filled the room. Mom, I'm still on the bus. The sentence was identical to the first message. The same quiet fear, the same low engine sound, the same child coughing in the distance. But this time, the background was different in one important way. Two people were breathing near the recording device. One breath was quick and frightened. The other was slow and deep. I looked at Lena. She was sitting perfectly still. Her mouth was closed. Her chest did not appear to be moving. The second breath continued through the phone. In, out, In, out, then, the frightened voice whispered. It found me. A hand struck the other side of our front door. Lena did not turn toward the sound. Another knock came. Then, another. 7 knocks in total. The phone continued playing. In the recording, I heard the bus doors open. Cold wind moved through the speaker, carrying the same whisper we had heard before. This time, the whisper formed a clear word. Home. Lena leaned forward. Don't open the door, Mom. Her voice sounded normal. Exactly like my daughter. From outside the house, another voice called through the door. Mom? It was also Lena. The girl across from me began to cry. The girl outside started knocking again. Mom, please let me in. My phone remained between us, still recording the sound of 2 people breathing. I looked at the front door. Then I looked at the girl in my living room. I tried to remember the afternoon when all of this began. The door opening, the bag falling, the refrigerator, the voice. I had never seen who came inside. I had only assumed. The person outside knocked once more. The Lena across from me whispered, "That isn't me." The voice outside said the same thing. The phone continued playing. One of the 2 people in the recording stopped breathing. I held my own breath. The girl across from me held hers too. The second breath continued. Slow, deep, close. I realized it was not coming only from the phone. It was coming from directly behind my chair. Story 5. I have worked as a fire lookout for 6 seasons. And after that much time alone in the mountains, you begin to understand the forest in a way that is difficult to explain to people who have never lived inside it. The woods have their own language. You learn the sharp smell that comes before a storm. You learn how the wind changes direction when rain is still hours away. You learn the strange pressure in the air before dry lightning strikes somewhere beyond the ridge. You learn which sounds belong to deer, bears, birds, insects, and trees rubbing together in the dark. More importantly, you learn the different kinds of silence. There is the peaceful silence of early morning, when the sun has not yet reached the valley and the animals are only beginning to wake. There is the empty silence of a cold afternoon after heavy rain. Then there is another kind, a deeper silence, the kind that makes the hair on your arms rise before you understand why. It means something is nearby. Usually, it is an animal, a mountain lion moving through the brush, a bear standing outside the light. Sometimes it is only another person on the trail, though visitors rarely reach my tower without warning. What happened 2 nights ago does not fit any of those things. It does not fit any language I understand. My tower stands on a ridge in the Umpqua National Forest in Oregon. It is an old wooden lookout with a small cabin raised high above the ground on metal supports. A narrow staircase climbs from the clearing to the door. The cabin itself is mostly windows, giving me a clear view in every direction. On a bright day, I can see almost 30 miles. Long ridges stretch into the distance, covered with dark green trees. Valleys disappear between them. In late summer, the forest looks dry and tired, and the slightest column of smoke becomes impossible to ignore. That is my job. I watch the land. I record weather conditions. I look for smoke. When I see something suspicious, I use a map and a sighting device to estimate the location, then call it in. Most of the work is quiet. During the day, I read, clean, make coffee, and stare through binoculars. At night, there is almost nothing to see. The windows turn into black mirrors, and beyond them are only trees, stars, and darkness. The radio is usually my only company. It is an old analog unit mounted near the desk. The casing is scratched, and the volume knob is loose. It picks up more than it should. I hear ranger conversations, maintenance crews, truck drivers on distant highways, and sometimes strange signals from far away. When the conditions are right, voices can travel hundreds of miles. I've heard weather reports from Canada and short conversations in Spanish that might have come from Mexico. Most nights, I leave the radio on scan at a low volume while I sleep. The soft hiss of static helps me relax. After years in the tower, silence can feel too complete. White noise makes the cabin feel less isolated. That night had been normal. The weather was clear. There had been no lightning and no reports of smoke. The wind had died shortly after midnight. I checked the windows, locked the door, wrote the final conditions in the logbook, and climbed into my sleeping bag. I woke suddenly at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because checking my watch was the first thing I did. I had not heard a loud noise. Nothing had struck the tower. There was no storm. Still, I was completely awake. For a moment, I lay still, trying to understand what had pulled me out of sleep. Then, I heard the radio. It was making a sound I had never heard before. It was not ordinary static. It was not music or a normal human voice. At first, it sounded like a recording of a woman whispering, but the words were being played backward. The whisper rose and fell in a slow rhythm, stretching into sounds that almost became language before slipping away again. Underneath it was a low hum. I did not just hear the hum. I felt it. It seemed to vibrate inside my teeth. There was pressure in my jaw, especially around my back molars. The metal frame of the bed gave a faint buzz beneath me. I remained inside the sleeping bag for almost a minute, listening. The cabin felt different. The air seemed heavier than normal, as if the windows had been closed for weeks. Breathing took more effort. The darkness outside the windows looked thicker than it should have been. I slowly sat up. The radio continued whispering. I reached toward it, planning to turn it off. Before my fingers touched the volume knob, the sound changed. The backward whisper stopped. The hum remained. Then a woman's voice spoke clearly from the speaker. "Can you see them?" I froze. The voice was calm. It did not sound frightened or angry. She spoke as casually as someone asking whether it was raining. I stared at the radio. There are people who enjoy interfering with official frequencies. I've heard drunk campers, bored teenagers, and angry hunters use the radio before. Usually they laugh or make stupid noises. Sometimes they pretend to be lost. This did not sound like a joke. I reached for the microphone and pressed the button. "This is Lookout 7 on the Umpqua dispatch frequency," I said. "Who is this?" For several seconds, the speaker produced only the low hum. Then the woman answered. "Can you see them, 7? The way she said my lookout number made my stomach tighten. "See who?" My voice cracked on the final word. I wish I could say I remained calm. I wish I could say I sounded professional. I did not. The woman replied without emotion. "The ones walking toward you." I turned toward the windows. The cabin has glass on all 4 sides, so I can see the entire clearing from almost anywhere inside. There was no moon that night. The forest beyond the tower was completely black. I looked at my watch again. 3:15 a.m. That confused me. It had felt like only a few minutes since I woke, but nearly half an hour had passed. A security light hangs near the bottom of the staircase. I keep it on at night because animals sometimes wander into the clearing. The light creates a yellow circle about 20 feet wide around the bottom steps. There was no one standing inside it. I looked toward the tree line, but the darkness beyond the light was too deep. "There's nobody here," I said into the microphone. "Identify yourself." The woman did not respond. I waited, still watching the clearing. My hand tightened around the microphone. "This is an official emergency frequency," I continued. "You need to identify yourself." Nothing. I was about to change channels and contact the ranger station when the voice returned. "They're not in the light yet." A cold feeling moved through my body. I put down the microphone and grabbed my binoculars from the table. The clearing around the tower is not large. Beyond the security light, there is a stretch of dirt and dry grass, followed by thick trees. During the day, I could have easily seen anyone approaching. At night, the binoculars were almost useless. I searched the edge of the clearing anyway. Nothing moved. There were no flashlights, no headlamps, no glow from a phone. I saw no tents or parked vehicles. No campers should have been near the tower at that hour. The trail closes after dark, and the forest road is blocked by a locked gate about a mile below the ridge. A person could walk around the gate, but they would have to know the road and climb for a long time in complete darkness. "This isn't funny," I said into the radio. "I'm calling this in." The woman replied immediately, "You won't reach them." I changed to the dispatch channel and pressed the microphone button. "Umpqua Dispatch, this is Lookout 7. Do you copy?" Silence, not normal radio silence. There was no static, no background noise, no faint click from another unit. The speaker became completely dead. I tried again. "Dispatch, Lookout 7. Possible trespassers at my location. Do you copy?" Nothing answered. I switched to another channel, then another. The scan function cycled through every available frequency without finding a signal. The NOAA weather broadcast was gone. The state police channel was empty. Even the local country music station, which normally reached the tower on clear nights, had disappeared. Every frequency contained only silence. Beneath that silence, I could still feel the hum in my teeth. I looked through the window again. The security light continued shining. The circle remained empty. Then I noticed something beyond it. 4 shapes stood in the darkness. They were not near the tree line. They were much closer than that. They stood perhaps 10 feet from the bottom of the stairs, just outside the light. I had not seen them approach. My first thought was that my eyes were creating shapes from the shadows. I lifted the binoculars and adjusted the focus. There were 4 people. At least they had the shape of people. They wore dark clothing, but not outdoor equipment. There were no jackets, backpacks, hats, or hiking boots that I could see. Their clothes looked plain and loose. All 4 stood side by side. Their heads were tilted upward toward the tower. I could not see their faces. The security light did not reach far enough, and the darkness seemed to gather around them. Still, I could tell they were staring directly at me. None of them moved. They did not shift their weight. They did not look at one another. Their arms hung at their sides. The radio crackled behind me. "They want you to open the door." No, I said it aloud, but I did not press the microphone button. The woman answered anyway. "They'll wait." I moved to the storage cabinet beside the bed and pulled out my rifle. It was an old bolt-action .308 that I kept mainly for mountain lions. I had fired it at targets, but I had never pointed it at another person. I loaded it and moved back to the window. The four figures remained exactly where they had been. I raised the rifle and aimed through the glass. Even if I had fired, I was not sure I could have hit them clearly from that angle. None of the figures reacted. They did not raise their hands. They did not run. They did not even turn their heads toward the rifle. "I'm armed," I said into the microphone. "Tell them to leave." The woman laughed. It was a quiet laugh, almost gentle. There was sadness in it rather than amusement. "They're not afraid of that." I tried dispatch again. No answer. I lifted my phone from the charger and checked the screen. There was no signal. There is almost never cell service at the tower, but I always try during an emergency. Sometimes one bar appears near the eastern window. I held the phone near every side of the cabin. Nothing. When I returned to the southern window, the four figures were no longer outside the circle of light. They were standing at the bottom of the stairs. My chest tightened. They had crossed the open ground without making a sound. All four now stood at the very edge of the yellow light. Their faces remained hidden. It was as if the light stopped before touching them. One of them had placed a hand on the first section of the metal railing. I could see the fingers. They were pale and strangely long. The hand was not gripping the rail. It simply rested there. "Don't come any closer." I shouted through the glass, "I will shoot." The figure did not remove its hand. None of them climbed. They continued staring up. The radio whispered behind me, "They only move when you aren't watching." I turned toward it for less than a second. When I looked back, the figure's hand was higher on the railing. I had not heard a footstep. I pressed the rifle against my shoulder and kept my eyes fixed on them. My mind searched for a logical explanation. Maybe they were people from a nearby camp. Maybe they had taken drugs. Maybe someone had planned the entire thing as a cruel joke. But no explanation made sense. They had no lights. They had reached the tower silently. The radio had gone dead at the exact moment the woman began speaking. She knew where I was looking. She knew when I turned away. Most of all, the four people below did not behave like frightened, tired, drunk, or angry human beings. They behaved like objects that had been placed there. Minutes passed. The figures did not move while I watched. My arms began to ache from holding the rifle. Sweat formed beneath my shirt, though the night air was cold. I tried speaking to them. "Who are you?" No answer. "Are you lost?" Nothing. "Do you need help?" The figure with its hand on the railing slowly tilted its head farther to one side. The movement was very small, but it made my stomach turn. The neck bent too smoothly, as if there were no bones inside it. I tightened my finger near the trigger. The radio spoke again. "You should let them in." I did not turn toward it. "Why?" The woman remained silent. "What do they want?" This time, the answer came as a whisper. "To be seen." "They've been seen." "No," she said. "Not yet." A faint sound came from beneath the tower. Metal creaking. I could not see the staircase clearly from where I stood. The cabin floor blocked part of my view. I moved carefully toward the next window, keeping the rifle pointed downward. The four figures were still at the bottom. Then, something knocked against the tower support beneath me. One slow knock. I jerked the rifle downward, searching for movement. The figures remained still. A second knock came from directly beneath the cabin. It was impossible for one of them to have reached that spot without climbing the stairs, but the stairs were empty. I backed away from the windows and stood near the center of the cabin. That was a mistake. For a few seconds, I could no longer see the people below. The staircase groaned. I rushed back to the window. All four were now several steps higher. They stood in a line on the staircase, each one directly behind the next. Their heads were still lifted toward the cabin. The figure in front had one foot on the fourth step. I aimed through the window. Stop. They froze. The radio gave another soft laugh. I did not look away from them again. I stood with the rifle against my shoulder and watched. Seconds became minutes. Minutes stretched longer. My eyes began to burn. Every time I felt the need to blink, panic rushed through me. I tried closing one eye at a time, hoping I could keep them in sight without losing them completely. For a while, it seemed to work. Then, the lights inside the cabin flickered. Only once. The darkness lasted less than a second. When the light returned, the four figures were halfway up the staircase. I stepped back so quickly that I struck the desk behind me. The front figure was close enough now that I could almost see its face. Almost. The skin looked pale. The mouth seemed too wide, but the darkness made it impossible to be sure. I moved toward the door and checked the lock. The deadbolt was in place. A metal bar rested in brackets across the frame. The radio hummed louder. "They're getting tired of waiting," the woman said. "I don't care. You will. What are they?" The woman did not answer. I shouted through the window again, "If you take one more step, I will shoot." None of them moved. I kept watching. Time became difficult to understand. I checked my watch repeatedly, but the hands seemed to move too slowly. At one point, it read 3:22. Much later, after what felt like an hour, it read 3:24. My shoulders burned. My hands shook. I thought about firing through the glass, but I could not bring myself to do it. They had not entered the cabin. They had not spoken. However frightening they looked, I still did not know what they were. If they were human, shooting first could destroy my life. If they were not human, I doubted the rifle would matter. The woman had already told me that. At some point, I heard a soft scraping from the roof. I looked upward without moving my head. Something passed over the cabin. A shadow crossed the glass ceiling panel above the stove. The four figures remained on the stairs. A quiet step sounded on the roof. Then another. Something walked slowly from one side of the tower to the other. I wanted to look up. Every instinct told me to raise the rifle toward the ceiling, but I remembered the woman's warning. They only moved when I was not watching. I kept my eyes fixed on the staircase. The footsteps stopped above the door. The handle moved, only a little. Then again, the metal bar across the door shook in its brackets. I nearly fired. "Who's on the roof?" I shouted. The woman answered through the radio. "One of the ones you missed." My mouth went dry. There had not been four. Or perhaps there were still only four, and one of them had moved when the lights went out. I could no longer trust what I was seeing. The figures on the stairs stood too close together. Their bodies overlapped in the darkness. I tried counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. For a moment, I thought I saw a fifth face between them. Then it was gone. The footsteps above me began again. The figure at the front of the stairs lifted one hand. It pointed toward the door. The radio whispered, "Open it." I said nothing. "Open it, Seven." No, they came a long way. "I don't care. They've been waiting longer than you know." The words made me feel suddenly cold. I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind since the first message. How do you know my lookout number? The hum deepened. The woman answered quietly. You told me. I've never spoken to you.